It's wonderful to be back in Numadike, honorable members of the head table, all protocols observed, scientists, technicians, and practitioners. 100 years young. 100 years young. I'm going to be giving a little global and regional perspective on where we're at with roots and tubers today. Is somebody going to put my slides up? That would be great. While we're getting that background going, I was noting in several addresses this morning that Nigeria, you are the force to reckon with in West and Central Africa for sure, but also on the whole continent. And for a long time, you've been the leaders in cassava, and you've been the leaders in yam. When I come back in 3 years, let's say, I want you to be number one in sweet potato, not number two. So, I'm hoping my slides will be up in a moment. Yeah, are they coming? Here we go. Excellent. I cannot see any of the writing, but I'm going to go ahead with the perspective issue. Can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, can we make it a little larger because it's a little hard for people to see? There we go. Thank you very much. So let's just take a look at where we are with roots and tubers globally, the status of roots and tubers. And we can see these are data. You can't see the years very clearly, but from 1961 to 2021. And as you can see, there's been a tremendous growth. This is for developing countries only. There's been a tremendous growth in cassava. And that's mostly occurred in sub-Saharan Africa, with Nigeria in the lead. Potato is the yellow line beneath it. And potato has tremendously grown in two countries, China and India. And that is because China made a decision to move potato into its cold areas, and they invested heavily in the seed technology known as aeroponics. And in India, which has much warmer areas in some production zones, they invested heavily in cold storage. And that enabled the potato crop to take off in both of these major Asian countries. Sweet potato, which you see in the orange line, of course, you can see it's had globally a different perspective because beginning in early 2000s, China is the #1 producer of sweet potato. Why? Because it's the #1 producer of pigs. Okay? And in the beginning in 2000, China began switching over from feeding their pigs sweet potato to imported concentrates. It may change now with the global situation. But so there's been an increase, a massive increase in sweet potato in Africa, but the global statistics are dominated by China. Okay. And of course, yam, which you see in the blue line, has also seen significant increase in the last, particularly in the last decade, and all of that increase has been in West Africa, dominated by Nigeria. Next slide, please. So where are these trends coming from? And these are from the FAO data, which we know we would love to see improved over time. Data is one of our issues. But most of the increase in cassava and yam has come principally from area expansion, although there have been some yield improvements as well in cassava. In potato, actually, we've seen really significant yield increases, again, driven in the Asian situation. And again, with sweet potato, all the shifts in area and yield are due to the fact that production has been moving from China to Africa. And in China, the average yield in sweet potato is 22 tons per hectare, where the average yield in the statistics for sweet potato is 7 tons per hectare. I think everybody in this room recognizes that we have much greater yield potential in all of our roots and tubers if significant investment is made. Next slide, please. Oh dear, this is really illegible. Okay. Basically, these data are looking at the value, the estimated value of the different roots and tubers globally. This comes from research that was done in 2020. And basically what we see in terms of value, that the crops globally that they're giving the highest value are banana and potato in terms of the value, total value of these crops. And value consists of quantity times price. So these crops are getting a higher price. So even though you have tremendous production of cassava, it has the lowest value globally among all the crops because of its low price per metric ton. And this is why it's such an important food source for countries that need to feed their people, because it's a relatively cheap source of calories. Next slide, please. So what are we seeing? As I mentioned before, the production of cassava and sweet potato is shifting to Africa, but yam and plantain have always been predominantly in Africa. If you look at the share, Africa's share of developing country area under root, tuber, and banana crops, you can see right now 98% of yam is produced in Africa, and 83% of plantain, and those numbers have always been high for Africa. But look at the shift now. Sweet potato moved from just being 5% of global production in 1960 to 56% of global production now in 2021, where the last year of these data are available. And potato has stayed around about 10 to 12%. Because potato requires the cooler climate and growing conditions. And banana, sweet banana, obviously there's a major export market and production center in Latin America that exports banana. Next, please. But let's look at what people are predicting. There's been a lot of modeling going around about what is our food system going to look like by 2050. And different models looking at, what's going to be the impact of climate change. And this particular analysis that looked in terms of quantities and value of production compared to cereals, fruits and vegetables and pulses, you'll see the cereals are in yellow, and the roots and tubers and bananas are in orange. And you can see both in terms of total production and the total value, the proportions are going to increase. The proportions are going to be much greater, and the change we're going to see between 2017 and 2050 based on this modeling is roots and tubers are going to outshine the cereals, and they're going to outshine the fruits and vegetables and pulses in terms of the total amount of increase in production, because we have that potential to fill that yield gap, as well as the total value of that. So the situation, the potential is very high for this new way to deliver prosperity to farmers that NRCRI is pursuing. Next, please. Next slide, please. If we look right now at the diet, and this is an important issue that we need to look at, because obviously getting funding for research and attracting funding, people have to understand the crop's role in the diet and its contribution to income. So I'm going to go into a few numbers in the next few slides here. And I've highlighted in yellow, where the per capita consumption is higher than the world average. In East and Southern Africa, and in West and Southern Africa. And of particular interest, if you look right now in the data from 2010, the world average for annual consumption of roots and tubers, not bananas. Bananas are placed under fruits and vegetables in this analysis. But for roots and tubers, the world average was 150 kilograms per capita per year. But look, in West and Central Africa, that's 540. And in East and Southern Africa, that's 311. And that trend is going to stay until 2050 based on this modeling under climate change conditions. So you can see that the importance of roots and tubers in the African diet is much more significant than in other countries in the world. The other places where it exceeds is in oils, Western Central Africa, and I believe that's due to the presence of palm oil in the diet. And also Africa has greater global consumption of beans per capita annually than the global average. Next, please. If we look at the slides of how we see roots and tubers in the regional food systems in Africa, it's interesting that actually in Central Africa, which includes DR Congo and Angola, about 74% of the staple foods are roots and tubers, the calories coming in the total food production. Whereas in West Africa, that's 57.7%, and you can see these are much greater amounts than in East Africa, which are maize-dominant systems, where roots and tubers in terms of total food production, staple food production, make up only 37%. Next, please. So I think in this room, you know, and I will just briefly, we all know what the food security value of root and tuber crops are. They really can enhance the resilience of the most vulnerable agroecological zones. You know, sweet potato and cassava are crops that are there when many of our cereal crops fail, particularly maize is particularly sensitive to climate change. They're increasingly used in disaster recovery programs. One of the reasons that Asia is investing so much in potato is its early maturity. You have a crop in 3 months, so it can fit in between crops of rice. It can fit in between crops of wheat if you're in the proper agroecologies. These are crops, especially sweet potato and cassava, that can serve the needs of the poorest households because they're able to produce on marginal soils even when some inputs aren't available. And of course, sweet potato and potato with their early maturity cycles give high energy output per unit time, per unit area compared to grain crops. And I think that's very important as our populations increase and our landholding sizes decrease per capita. And we know that the roots and tubers are much more water use efficient than most grain crops. So really, it's a time for integration. We should be integrating more completely in cereal and pulse-based systems, in rotation with legumes, and increasing the efficiencies of our cropping systems and helping to generate off-season income as well through the investment and use of irrigation on these crops, because they can be extremely responsive to adequate water supply. And of course, the area that I've been most engaged with, biofortification, it's a very important way to get key micronutrients into the diet, and NRCRI has worked on the orange flesh sweet potato as well as the yellow cassava for provitamin A. We now have released in Latin America and are testing in Africa iron-fortified, biofortified potato varieties. And we're still working on iron-fortified orange flesh sweet potato varieties. Next slide, please. And the research under biofortification for iron, which is a major, major micronutrient deficiency both in developed and developing countries, has been proved to be moving forward. We have excellent iron bioavailability in yellow flesh potatoes, 28%. That means the body can absorb that iron. In sweet potato, we haven't been as lucky. In women of low iron status, we're only seeing bioavailability of 8%, so we have to keep breeding until we reach 60 ppm per 100 grams. We're now at 44 in our, including iron with our orange flesh sweet potatoes. So it's going to take more cycles of breeding. And this is due to the fact that in your purple flesh potatoes and your orange flesh sweet potatoes, there are a lot of other very important phytonutrients called polyphenols, which are blocking the uptake of the iron that is in the sweet potato. But polyphenols are also very important for health, so we don't want to get rid of them. Next, please. Another difficult slide to see. My apologies. So another analysis here basically looked at the historical rates of commodity yield growth in target countries. In this analysis, they did not include China and Brazil in the analysis. And one of the issues here is that roots and tubers are behind in terms of annual percentage growth compared to cereals, compared to pulses, because in this analysis they were saying you'd want to see an annual growth rate in productivity of at least 1.12% to be able to achieve an improvement of 25% overall within the period until 2030. So basically, we have tons of work to do to continue to get productivity up, and as well as improve the database systems for capturing our productivity increases. And again, in the bars on the right, you're seeing that the overall contribution to calories in the current diet and the projected diet for 2030, the roots and tubers are shown in green and are contributing about 113 on average to the global diet. So again, here the situation in West Africa is much different. Next, please. Oh, this, unfortunately, I'm so sorry about these not coming through. This is not the right projector, unfortunately, for these slides. So this is a slide basically that looked at what if research budgets were allocated based on what they call parity. What if you gave money out for researchers for the impact that they're supposed to have on different outcomes? And the outcomes that you cannot see here include income, productivity, other measures of environmental impact. And the bright blue on the left side are your cereals. And then in the orange are your roots and tubers. And one of the reasons we have to be honest that cereals get so much funding is because they do have, based on these types of analyses, significant impacts on income and environmental issues, because if we can improve their productivity, they occupy so much land that's going to have a positive impact. The fruits and vegetables are in the light blue over to the right. So in terms of impact right now, the major impact would come from investing more on income on fruits and vegetables. But if you weight based on poverty and the impact on the poorest, which is the second bar from the bottom, you see that roots and tubers come in very strongly in terms of contributing to poverty reduction. They're trying to fix this. But let's move on to the next slide. Okay. Another slide here is showing when they took this analysis at the global level and broke it down to subregions, you really saw a different situation with West and Central Africa. And that's why I'm stopping here, because in West and Central Africa, productivity increases in roots and tubers offer the highest potential among commodity groups to generate income gains while productivity is increasing. So really, West and Central Africa stands out as the region in which we can make the most progress in helping with incomes from investing in improving productivity. In comparison, the amount that would be gained in East and Southern Africa is much lower. Next slide, please. So what are we seeing? Because we work in a global environment when we're trying to get investment in our research and development activities, some reports come out that are incredibly influential that we need to be aware of because it affects our ability to get these critical investments that we need. And a lot of work is going on in looking at healthy diets and looking at diets for more sustainable food systems. How many here have heard of the 2019 East Lancet Commission? Can you show hands? Have you heard of the East Lancet Commission study? Am I losing people in the back of the room? Hello? Okay. So nobody's heard of the East Lancet study. It was a very influential study that came out because it was the first time they were looking at current consumption patterns and their impact on the environment, how sustainable they were, their energy use. It was really a global analysis. And they're pushing to get dietary change, particularly in Europe and America, away from diets that are consuming basically too much meat and towards more plant-based diets. So in their minds, healthy diets have an appropriate caloric intake and consist of diversity of plant-based foods, low amounts of animal source foods, unsaturated rather than saturated fats, and small amounts of refined grains, highly processed foods, and added sugars. And what did they say about roots and tubers? And this was very concerning for us that work on roots and tubers because they didn't say much, and most of what they said was fairly negative. They recommended a daily intake of roots and tubers of only 50 grams per day, which is, a range from 0 to 100, but this is a very low amount. And potatoes, although containing a large concentration of potassium and other vitamins, because of their high glycemic index, that means you digest them very quickly, they were recommending lower consumption of potatoes than is the norm in Europe and America. Because if you eat them all the time, it's been associated with increased risks of type 2 diabetes and hypertension. But of course, a lot of the potatoes eaten in Europe and America are also deep fat fried, which is unhealthy. In Africa, potatoes are mostly eaten boiled or steamed, which is the very healthy way to consume them. And globally, they said that cassava is recognized for being able to produce in semi-arid conditions, but they're saying when it was processed into flour, it has low nutritional value and high glycemic load. So again, cassava was very heavily criticized in this report. And sweet potato and yam weren't even mentioned. Now, I'm assuming because it was written by Western scientists mostly, that sweet potato was put under vegetables and fruits. And so it was probably considered as a red and orange vegetable, which they were recommending 100 grams per day consumption. And of course, we know that sweet potato only has a medium glycemic index, and yam is lower than sweet potato. So in terms of digestibility, you digest these two roots and tubers more slowly. Next slide, please. Okay. And even though in this report they had this excellent diagram showing the energy use, the eutrophic potential, the effect on land and irrigation use, even though they had and they showed from the environmental status, I've circled in green roots, it had the lowest negative impact on the environment of any of the categories. But again, this wasn't pointed out in the document, in the text. They were really focused on the red lines, which is the high animal source impact, animal food source impact on the environment. Next, please. Okay, so we're looking at the cost of a healthy diet, and there's a lot of interest now in transforming our food systems and getting people to move towards a more healthy diet. And as part of that, we have to understand what the cost of a healthy diet is. And the cost of the healthy diet is beyond the reach of 3 billion people globally. So if we go, please, next, please. Can we hit, please, next? Okay. A healthy diet and right at this time, it costs almost 5 times more than an energy-sufficient diet. So we know we need better diet diversity. We know we need to get incomes up to help have a healthy diet, but we have to create access to those healthy foods and willingness to consume those healthy foods. So a healthy diet in this study was estimated to cost $3.75 per day versus an energy-sufficient diet, which was 79 USD across the 18 countries studied. So basically, the bottom line is 75% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia cannot afford a healthy diet. So we've got a lot of work to do to improve on that statistic. Next, please. So what are the critical investments needed? We really do need agricultural research to provide more productive and sustainable technologies. And I would say greater investment in public sector research in institutions like NRCRI, who tend to do research for the poor and the smallholder farmers, as opposed to private sector, which is focused on profit generation. Next, please. And we've been working a lot at SIP and ITA as well, and other institutions, and NRCRI has been involved in this work on biofortification. And why is it important to enhance the micronutrient content of our staple foods? And so far the focus has been on the 3 major micronutrients essential for good health: vitamin A, iron, and zinc. And we focus on this because poor people get more than 50% of their calories from food staples. And there's often sometimes people that criticize, well, we should just do more work on fruit and vegetables and get diversified diets. But as you saw, to buy that diversified diet, you need more money. And right now, many of our population don't have that money. So we do need greater investment in fruit and vegetable and pulse research to bring the cost of those products down. But in the medium term, poor people are going to continue. And as we've seen with rising food prices across sub-Saharan Africa, when prices go up, of course, people prioritize eating staples first, because if you don't have your staple, you're going to be hungry. And you can't feel your micronutrient malnutrition. That's why it's called hidden hunger. Next, please. So you can't see this example very well, but what people often don't recognize, because of the large quantities eaten, staple foods are often the source of many micronutrients, and sometimes the major source of many micronutrients. So that means when we breed, we do need to pay attention to micronutrient content, because it's going to be a major way to deliver those. And that's the principle of biofortification, that staple foods can help us address diet quality. We aren't saying we want to increase the amount of staple foods people are eating, but we want to make sure that the quality of those staples are higher. And then if they generate income from utilizing those staple foods, they can use that to buy a more diversified diet. Next, please. So we're looking at climate change, and in this room I don't have to convince anybody that climate change is a reality. We're living it anywhere we're working in rain-fed agriculture, and it's really difficult. But what we know with climate change, our temperatures are almost at an increase of 1.5. They say we've almost hit that point. This is not going to go away. Next, please. So what it means is the effects are going to vary based on the kinds of plants you have. Next, please. And there's 2 major types of plants that we have based on their carbon fixation pathway. And we have our C4 plants like maize and sorghum and millet. And with rising CO2, they expect there to be significant yield loss decrease, at least 8%. So you're going to lose significant yield in these crops with that pathway. But our C3 plants that include rice and wheat, potato, sweet potato, and cassava, actually with increasing CO2, yield is going to go up. But the problem's going to be, next please, The problem's going to be when the yield goes up, all that yield's going to be in carbohydrate, and the nutrient density is going to go down. Did you get what I'm saying? So you might be happy, oh, our cassava yields are going up, our sweet potato yields are increasing. But actually, under climate change with the increased heat and growth and CO2 output, we might actually see the amount of beta carotene or the amount of vitamin C or other key nutrients going down per 100 grams. And that can be, so we're going to really have to be paying more attention to a broader range of micronutrients in our breeding programs if we're really going to have quality diets in the face of climate change. Next, please. I'm really happy to be in Nigeria because Nigeria is now engaging in genetic engineering, and the executive director has shown great leadership in this. And I feel that genetic engineering could potentially really accelerate our ability to address micronutrient deficiencies in staples and our biofortification effort. That, as you know, for many years has been blocked due to political and resistance to GMOs and genetic engineering, but it's beginning to change now, and Nigeria has been one of the first countries to open up. Ethiopia has also begun to open up, and Kenya just has approved working on genetic engineering and GMOs. So countries are coming around, and I think the driving factor, frankly, is climate change. We're going to have to move faster and better in our breeding efforts. So far, all of the work we've done at SIP has been conventional breeding for biofortification. And so, for example, there's been examples where genetic engineering has been used in cassava, and they've been able to get, at the test level, an 18-fold increase in iron, a 10-fold increase in zinc levels, and again, it's the manipulation of genes in the pathway to increase the iron uptake and capture iron in the desired tissues. So we can make advances given the opening up of this technology use in Nigeria. Next, please. So what is the way forward? Because I think we have to work on changing the narrative for roots and tubers. We have many leaders here today and policy makers, and I think we have to be pointing out time and time again and keep repeating that roots and tubers provide critical calories that are locally available. When you're having problems with trade, roots and tubers come to the forefront. They provide more affordable calories to be balanced with other foods in a diverse diet. But for some crops, particularly I think for sweet potato and cassava, we have to change its image, that they aren't seen as being primarily crops for the poor. And we can promote the win-win opportunities that you're using local farmers when you're eating these and consuming these crops in the country. We have to come up with more innovative recipes and diversity in how we use our roots and tubers in the diet. And of course, I would argue for prioritizing the biofortified crops so we're producing more quality diets using our roots and tubers. So how do we get them more prioritized in government policies? We have to really point out the resilience and water use efficiency in the face of climate change, particularly when you compare roots and tubers to cereals, and of course, their processing potential for generating new forms of income, which has been a major focus in the cassava work at NRCRI and IATA. Next, please. So I have to put in a pitch for orange flesh sweet potato. In a sense, I think it's its own circular economy, because no part of the plant goes to waste. The roots are used, the vines are used as planting material, or human beings can eat the leaves. They're a very rich source of lutein. And of course, they're a great animal feed used heavily in the dairy industry in East Africa because of their high protein content. Next, please. And I need to point out, it's the only root and tuber that grows in all 36 states of Nigeria. So really, sweet potato can be everywhere throughout this country to contribute to diet quality and diversified use. Next, please. So we have, and a major issue is the triple burden of micronutrient malnutrition that exists now in most African countries. So we still have an undernutrition problem, a micronutrient malnutrition problem. Next, please. Next. The undernutrition, obviously, if you're undernourished, your mortality rate goes up significantly, particularly among under fives. We estimate that it's 2 billion persons deficient in micronutrients. And on the overweight front, next please, 1.9 billion adults also are considered overnourished. This is globally. So there's a growing call. We're no longer talking about feeding people. We need to be talking about nourishing people with healthy foods. Next, please. And of course, COVID-19 added at least 132 million more malnourished people in 2020 alone. That went down a bit in 2021. But of course, with the massive conflicts we are seeing in the world, it's going up again. Next, please. One of the classic examples that I give of a broken food system actually comes from Nigeria, and it's the story of Indomie. How many people here have children who love to eat Indomie? Be honest, raise your hands. Oh, I think it's more than that. I'm seeing only a few hands. What about yourselves? Who likes Indomie? It's fast, it's convenient, you have a sauce on top. And Indomie has been promoted in the business literature. If you look at the business literature, it's considered a great success story. Nigeria is now the 11th largest consumer of instant noodles in the world as of May 2020. Okay, that's 2,790 million servings annually of instant noodles. Okay, it came into Nigeria in 1988 as one company out of Indonesia. And now you have 17 companies making instant noodles. So from a business perspective, this is a great thing. From a nutritionist perspective, is it a great thing? No. And yet there's a symbol on it that it's approved by the Nigerian Society of Nutrition. It's heavily marketed as a health food. It's, as you know, many of your primary schools are painted, tasty, good for you. And they sponsor clubs to promote it among young children. So it's really influencing feeding habits of very influential young consumers. And of course, they promote it as an easy option for overworked mothers as well. But if you look at Indomie, it's high on calories, fat, and sodium. 3 things you really don't want in your diet. It has low dietary fiber. It has MSG added, and it's what we call a highly ultra-processed foods. And recently, in the past few years, they've started fortifying it with vitamin A and B6, I think, to make up for some of the nutrient deficiencies. But even as a source of calories, it's not a healthy food. It's 25 cents USD per 70-gram packet. Okay, but it's so light, that 70-gram packet. If you convert that into kilos, for your energy source, you're paying $3.57. Versus if you bought a kilogram of yam, you're probably looking more like 59 cents. So you have a product that's giving you calories that are 6 times more expensive than your healthy staple. Okay, is Nigeria moving in the right direction? No, ultra-processed foods are not good for human nutrition. Next, please. So again, this is too hard to see, I apologize. But there's, again, this same group that's working on transforming our food systems is promoting what they call positive food system development pathways. And the key thing to focus on here is the policy pathway. A lot of countries are experimenting, for example, just to give you an example of one policy, you can tax an unhealthy food to move consumers away from that unhealthy food. And the question is, what do you do with that tax revenue? Okay, many countries are using that to fund nutrition education in the schools or campaigns to let consumers know. They're funding labeling on products to say, this is a healthy food to eat, this isn't a healthy food to eat. But why not? Why don't we be innovative and talk to our policymakers? Some of that money gained from taxing a product like Indomie could be moved into agricultural research for soil health improvement, or biofortification of foods, or fruit and vegetable research. We can be innovative in how we go about trying to remake the food system to be healthier for children in the future. Next, please. In our work on orange flesh sweet potato, we are really focused at the moment of doing wheat flour substitution. Partial wheat flour substitution is possible. We use steamed and mashed sweet potato known as puree. Much of wheat flour, as you know, is imported in many countries, if not completely imported. So you can see it gives the product a nice golden color, improves its nutritional quality, because actually the starch in sweet potato is more resistant, so it actually makes the bread have a lower glycemic index. In flatbreads, we can replace up to 55%. In breads that rise, we typically replace 30 to 35%. But we have to make sure and be making sure that the product we're producing is healthier than the product we're trying to replace. Next, please. And what about biodiversity? Where are the champions of the underutilized roots and tubers? Mr. Cocoyam. Dr. Cocoyam is here. Yes. Okay. Obviously, we've been talking about the big four, but we shouldn't forget the underutilized roots and tubers. At the International Potato Center, we have ahipa or jicama yam bean, and this is a nitrogen-fixing root crop. We've tested it in Africa. We should be getting more resources to expand its use. Next, please. But one of the interesting things that has been happening recently in January 2023, the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils, VACS, was announced as a collaboration between the United States State Department, the African Union, and FAO, which is going to focus on traditional and indigenous crops in Africa that have been not invested in, and they're especially going to be investing in breeders of some of the forgotten crops. And in the phase one, I believe several IITA scientists were at the phase one meeting. 60 crops were selected for consideration, and all the roots and tubers are there in terms of cocoyam, taro, cassava, yam, sweet potato, inset, and a legume that also has a tuber, African yam bean. So again, they evaluated these on which parts of Africa they would be suitable for. In the next phase, they're going to cut down to an initial 25 to do modeling and see what kind of progress could be made through investment in breeding. So more and more people are becoming interested in the traditional and indigenous crops that have not been fully supported, like cocoyam, like taro, that need greater investment because they have important contributions. And as you can see always, everything but inset has a high potential rating for West Africa. Next, please. So we need to continue addressing in roots and tubers our seed system bottleneck. Because of time, I won't go into details here. There's been a lot of innovative research on getting early generation seeds moving, but we need a lot more work on our seed enterprise strategies to get these good varieties out to farmers. I think we all know, we've heard the messages today. This is a topic research area because it's difficult to commercialize root and tuber crops like cassava and sweet potato because it's so easy for farmers to share planting material. But I think we can get that 1.1% annual productivity increase we need to address the needs of the future population just by having quality seed systems. And then everything else above that in terms of agronomic practice is an additional benefit. So look at the RTB toolbox for more information on that. Next, please. Obviously, the other area where we really need to focus research on roots and tubers is in post-harvest storability. I think it's critical to have better post-harvest storability, either in processed or fresh form, to be able to access these growing institutional markets like school feeding. I think the RTB breeders and the food technologists recognize this challenge and are investing in this area. Obviously, for cassava, tackling post-harvest physiological deterioration has always been the, how should I say, the holy grail of cassava post-harvest research. And we are really working on potato to improve tolerance to storage diseases and sprouting control. Sweet potato has to have that advantage to sprout again after the dry season, but also have longer shelf life in fresh storage. And the research is underway that I think you'll hear about more at this meeting on methods for understanding storage on starch, fiber, and pectins in cassava and yam. Next, please. In sweet potato, again, I touch on that. We're really focusing in our poorest, really drought-prone areas, in encouraging fresh root storage in layers of dry sand, which enables people to keep the roots for 4 to 6 months. And in Kenya, we're conducting research for commercial quantities on adapted vegetable units adapted for sweet potato to do solar-powered cold storage. Because I imagine Nigeria has the same problem as Kenya. Electricity is too expensive for much crop storage, and it's unreliable. Next, please. So some concluding thoughts. Clearly, we need to get clear messages out and more government buy-in into the roots and tuber effort, both in our research and in our dissemination activities. The message of critical crops that are affordable, locally grown, and increased productivity is attainable at a very reasonable cost. We need to be paying attention to nutrition composition in breeding, processing, and recipe development. And each of our roots and tubers has a feature to emphasize. We certainly need to identify and train influencers within countries and regional advocates. And you scientists also need to become advocates for your work. We need better data on how to build healthy diets and increase incomes with roots and tubers to make the case. Next, please. And I just bring this up because, as it was mentioned earlier, we were just at the Borlaug Dialogues, where the World Food Prize is given out every year. And we had the Vice President of Nigeria with us, along with the Minister of Agriculture and other dignitaries there. And the Vice President gave an excellent speech talking about Nigeria's commitment to addressing the state of emergency in agriculture in Nigeria because of the high food prices. And Nigeria is not alone. Everywhere I go in the region, it's the same message. Staple foods, our prices have been rising 20%, 30%, 50%. Obviously, hunger is an issue. And he gave an excellent speech and talked about the list of ongoing programs. But the focus was on rice and wheat. I have nothing against rice and wheat. But when I look, for example, the National Agricultural Growth Scheme Agro-Pocket Program, the focus is on maize, rice, wheat, soybeans, and sorghum. My friends, where are the roots and tubers? We are not doing our job. The man from the government is here. Yeah? Who's going to feed your population? Especially under climate change. It is the roots and tubers that are going to keep your folks healthy. And we can get incredible productivity growth. Nigeria's population, I think now estimated at 216 million, is expected to grow to 400 million by 2050. That means landholding size per capita is going to diminish significantly. You're going to have more people in the cities, but even in the rural areas, the holding size per capita will go down. Roots and tubers are going to be a critical part of the food system scheme, and they do not need to be considered as secondary food crops, but key staples for contributing to the health of the Nigerian population and its prosperity. So really, thank you for your attention. I think in honor of one of the greatest advocates, he was recognized today, Professor Malaki Akaroda, and the 100th anniversary. Let's make a commitment to educate and inform and then transform the image and contribution of Roots and Tubers in West Africa, led by Nigeria. Thank you.